The wolves arrived before the sun again, not one, not five. More than 30 battle-scarred wolves moved silently through the frozen forest, carrying broken bodies across their backs. Every one of them ignored the royal healing temple, standing only a few miles away. They ignored the priests blessed by the moon goddess. They ignored the healers chosen by the Alpha King himself. Instead, they stopped before the smallest cabin in the kingdom. A cabin that belonged to a woman everyone called useless. She had no sacred gift, no healing blessing, no noble blood. The council had already declared that she would never save a single life. Yet every dawn, the strongest wolves in the kingdom chose only her. No one understood why. The royal healers called it madness. The elders called it blasphemy. The nobles demanded she be arrested before her lies spread any further. But then something impossible happened. The wolf that every royal healer had already abandoned walked back out of her cabin before sunrise. Not limping, not bleeding, completely healed. From that morning forward, fear began spreading through the kingdom. Because every wolf that entered her cabin returned alive. Every wolf that stayed with the royal healers died. Soon even the Alpha King received reports that his own warriors were disobeying direct orders just to reach her door before dawn. He should have punished them. Instead, he mounted his horse himself, because deep inside he feared one terrifying possibility. The wolves remembered someone that he had once abandoned. And if that was true, everything he had built as Alpha King was about to collapse. The wolves arrived before the sun rose above the mountains. Dark shapes moved through the sleeping forest without making a sound. Their heavy paws pressed into the frozen ground while their glowing eyes searched only one path. Each wolf carried another across its back. Some of the wounded barely breathed. Others left thin trails of blood behind them. Every one of them had already been declared beyond saving. The Royal Healing Temple stood only a short distance away. Its great towers touched the morning sky. Sacred fires burned through every night. Priests waited inside with blessed water and ancient magic gifted by the moon goddess herself. Yet not a single wolf climbed those white stone steps. Not one. They passed the temple as if it did not exist. They walked deeper into the forest until they reached a lonely wooden cabin hidden beneath ancient trees. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney. The cabin looked too small to carry hope. Its walls were old. Its roof had been repaired more times than anyone could count. Nothing about the place suggested power. Nothing except the wolves. They stopped before the door without making a sound. Then they waited. The wooden door slowly opened. A young woman stepped into the cold morning air. She wore simple clothes faded by years of hard work. Her hands carried stains from herbs and medicine that never seemed to wash away. Loose strands of dark hair moved softly in the wind, while tired eyes studied every wounded wolf with calm patience. She never looked surprised, as though she had expected them. As though this had become part of every sunrise. The largest wolf lowered his injured companion onto the ground before her feet. He bowed his head, not in fear, not in weakness, in trust. The woman knelt beside the wounded animal. She touched its fur with gentle hands and carefully examined every wound. Broken bones, deep cuts, poison spreading beneath the skin. None of it frightened her. She simply nodded to herself before carrying fresh water from a wooden bucket. Inside the cabin, shelves overflowed with dried herbs gathered from distant mountains. Glass bottles reflected the first light of dawn. Strange roots hung from the ceiling beside carefully tied bundles of leaves collected through every season. No glowing magic filled the room. No sacred light appeared. Only knowledge. Only patience. Only years of quiet discipline. Outside, the forest remained silent. The wolves never left. They guarded the little cabin as though it were the most valuable place in the kingdom. Far away, the Royal Healing Temple began welcoming nobles and wealthy merchants seeking blessings. The priests spoke proudly of divine gifts. The royal healers praised their own power. They laughed whenever the woman in the forest was mentioned. They called her foolish. They called her dangerous. Most of all, they called her a fraud. She had never received the blessing of the moon goddess. She had failed every sacred trial. She carried no healing mark upon her hands. According to every law inside the kingdom, she should never have been trusted with a single patient. Yet the wolves never listened. Morning after morning, they returned only to her. No one understood why, not even the Alpha King. For years, strange reports had reached the palace. Every report sounded impossible. Every report described wounded wolves refusing royal treatment. Every report ended exactly the same. They survived. The royal healers blamed luck. The priests blamed coincidence. The council blamed rumors spread by jealous villagers. No one dared investigate further because accepting the truth would destroy everything they believed. Inside the cabin, the woman worked without rest. Hours passed. The wounded wolf remained perfectly still while she cleaned every wound with careful precision. She mixed crushed herbs with warm water. She wrapped broken bones using smooth pieces of carved wood. She whispered nothing. She prayed to no goddess. Her hands never trembled. Every movement came from experience earned through endless failures and quiet determination. Outside, snow slowly began falling across the forest. The waiting wolves lifted their heads together. They sensed something changing. Slowly, the wounded wolf opened his eyes. His breathing grew stronger. The poison stopped spreading. He struggled to stand. At first, his legs shook beneath him. Then he took one step, another. Soon he walked toward the cabin door without falling. The other wolves lowered their heads. Not to the healed wolf, to the woman. It was not worship, it was respect. The deepest respect warriors could ever offer. Hidden among distant trees, someone watched everything. A royal messenger had followed the wolves before sunrise. He had expected madness. He had expected tricks. Instead, he watched the impossible unfold before his own eyes. His heart pounded harder with every passing moment, because he had visited the royal healing temple the previous night. Those same healers had declared the wolf beyond saving. They had already accepted his death, yet now the animal stood stronger than before. The messenger turned his horse toward the capital without looking back. His hands shook against the reins. He knew this report would reach the Alpha King before nightfall. He also knew no one inside the palace would want to believe it, because if one forgotten woman without divine blessing could succeed where every royal healer failed, then the foundation of the entire kingdom had begun to crack. And somewhere deep, inside the palace walls, one secret buried years ago was waiting to awaken. Before another sunrise, the Alpha King himself would hear a truth that had followed him like a shadow for far too long. And this time, he would no longer be able to ignore it. The royal messenger rode without stopping until the black walls of the capital finally appeared through the morning mist. His horse breathed hard beneath him while the city slowly came alive. Merchants opened their shops, soldiers changed their watch, servants hurried through the streets carrying baskets and water. None of them knew that the kingdom had already begun to change before the first light touched the sky. The messenger never slowed. He crossed the massive gates and entered the royal fortress where every stone carried the weight of centuries. Guards recognized the royal seal hanging from his shoulder and stepped aside without asking questions. His face said enough. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Deep inside the palace, the royal council had already gathered. Golden banners hung from towering walls. Sacred flames burned inside silver bowls. Noble families filled the chamber wearing robes stitched with symbols of power and ancient bloodlines. At the center stood the chief royal healer. His white robes shined beneath the morning light pouring through tall windows. Around his neck rested the crystal pendant given only to those blessed directly by the moon goddess. His voice carried pride. His eyes carried certainty. He believed there was no illness beyond his understanding, no wound beyond his power, no healer above him. The messenger entered the chamber and bowed before the throne. The Alpha King had not yet arrived. Instead, the council demanded the report first. The chief healer folded his arms. His expression showed little interest. He already believed he knew the answer. The messenger slowly lifted his head. His voice remained steady, though his heart still raced. The wolf survived. Silence covered the chamber. One elder smiled with quiet amusement. Another shook his head. The chief healer laughed softly. Impossible. The messenger did not lower his eyes. He repeated the words. The wolf survived. The council exchanged uneasy glances. The healer took one slow step forward. Who treated him? The messenger answered without hesitation. The woman in the forest. The room suddenly felt colder. Several nobles whispered beneath their breath. Some looked irritated, others looked frightened. The chief healer narrowed his eyes. That woman has no blessing. She has no sacred gift. She has no right to touch the wounded. The messenger remained calm, yet the wolf walked away. No answer came. For the first time, the chief healer found himself searching for words that refused to appear. An old council member finally broke the silence. This is only luck. Nothing more. One survivor changes nothing. The messenger looked directly at the council. It was not one. It was every wolf I have watched this month. Another silence settled across the chamber. Longer this time, he continued. The wolves refuse every royal healer. They refuse every temple. They travel through snow and darkness to reach only her cabin. Every single one returns alive. Fear slowly replaced confidence, not because they believed the woman possessed magic, because they feared the people would begin believing it. Power inside the kingdom had always rested upon faith. Faith in the throne, faith in the temples, faith in the sacred healers. If ordinary people stopped believing those institutions, then the kingdom itself would begin to crack. The chief healer clenched his hands behind his back. His calm expression slowly disappeared. Find a reason. Any reason, the messenger answered quietly. I searched for one. I found none. The chamber doors suddenly opened. Every noble immediately lowered their heads. The Alpha King entered without announcing himself. He wore no crown, only dark armor marked by years of battle. His broad shoulders carried the quiet strength of a ruler who had survived wars that should have destroyed entire kingdoms. His presence alone silenced every voice. He crossed the chamber, with slow, measured steps before taking his place upon the throne. His sharp eyes studied every face. He immediately sensed the tension. Speak. The chief healer stepped forward first. A meaningless rumor has disturbed the council this morning. Nothing worthy of your majesty. The Alpha King shifted his gaze toward the messenger. You speak. The messenger bowed once more. Then he told everything exactly as he had seen it. Not one detail changed. Not one word softened. He described the wolves, the abandoned temple, the forgotten cabin, the wounded animal, the impossible recovery. When he finished, the chamber remained completely silent. The Alpha King asked only one question. How many reports like this have reached the palace? The messenger hesitated, then answered honestly. Hundreds. The king's eyes darkened. Why was I never told? No one answered. The silence itself became the answer. Someone had hidden the truth. Someone inside the palace had decided the Alpha King should never know. The realization settled heavily across the throne room. The chief healer quickly stepped forward. These stories threaten the order of the kingdom. People believe foolish things when fear controls them. The woman should be arrested before this spreads further. Several council members immediately agreed. Their voices filled the chamber. She breaks sacred law. She insults the moon goddess. She weakens public trust. She must disappear. The Alpha King listened without changing his expression. Then he slowly stood. The room fell silent again. His voice remained calm. Too calm. If she is truly a fraud, then proving it will be simple. No one spoke. If she is innocent, then punishing her would make us the criminals. Several elders lowered their eyes. The chief healer felt the ground shifting beneath him. The Alpha King stepped down from the throne. I will see this woman myself. Shock spread across every face. The chief healer immediately objected. "Your Majesty, there is no need for you to waste your time." The king looked directly into his eyes. "There is every need, because I no longer know whether my kingdom has been protecting the truth or hiding it from me." Those words echoed through the chamber long after he walked away. Behind the calm expression of the Alpha King, another emotion quietly awakened, a memory. A distant memory buried beneath years of war and responsibility. A young woman standing alone. A promise never kept. A choice he had convinced himself was necessary. He had buried that memory so deeply that he believed it was gone forever. Now the reports had dragged it back into the light. As the sun climbed higher above the kingdom, the Alpha King ordered his horse prepared. By the next dawn, he would ride into the forest himself. He believed he was searching for answers. He did not yet realize the answers were about to uncover the greatest mistake of his entire life. The journey began before the first light touched the mountain peaks. The Alpha King rode alone. No royal guards followed him. No banners flew behind him. No horns announced his arrival. Only the sound of his horse echoed through the silent forest, while cold wind slipped between the ancient trees. Every step forward stirred another memory that he had spent years trying to bury. He remembered a younger version of himself, a prince instead of a king, a man who still believed every promise could be kept. Then came war. Then came betrayal. Then came choices that demanded sacrifice. Some wounds healed with time, others waited quietly beneath the surface. The messenger rode several hundred steps behind him without speaking. He understood that the king wanted silence more than company. As dawn slowly painted the sky, the cabin finally appeared through the mist. It looked exactly as the messenger had described. Small, simple, forgotten. Nothing about it reflected greatness, yet something felt different the moment the king crossed into the clearing. The forest itself seemed peaceful. Birds rested upon the branches without fear. The wind carried the scent of fresh herbs instead of blood. Even the wolves standing outside the cabin remained calm. They noticed the king immediately. Every pair of glowing eyes turned toward him. The messenger instinctively reached for his sword. The Alpha King raised one hand. "Do not move." The wolves never growled. They never lowered themselves into attack. Instead, they watched him with strange patience, almost as if they were measuring his heart instead of his strength. One enormous silver wolf slowly walked forward. Scars covered its body from countless battles. Its golden eyes remained fixed upon the king. For several long moments, neither one moved. The messenger could barely breathe. One wrong movement could turn the clearing into a battlefield. Then something impossible happened. The silver wolf lowered its head. Not in fear, not in submission, in acknowledgement. The Alpha King felt an unfamiliar weight settle inside his chest. These wolves recognized him, yet their loyalty belonged somewhere else. The cabin door slowly opened. The woman stepped outside carrying a wooden basket filled with freshly gathered herbs. She stopped the moment she noticed the stranger standing beyond the wolves. Their eyes met. The world seemed to fall silent. She recognized the royal armor immediately. He recognized nothing, and somehow that hurt more than he could understand. She bowed respectfully. Not deeply, only enough to honor the crown. The king studied her carefully. She looked exactly as the reports described. Simple clothing. Rough hands shaped by years of labor. No sacred mark. No glowing blessing. Nothing that resembled the divine healers inside his palace. Yet every wolf around her stood completely at ease. That alone spoke louder than any title. Before either of them could speak, another sound shattered the silence. Heavy footsteps crashed through the trees. A young wolf stumbled into the clearing. Its white fur had turned crimson with blood. One of its front legs bent at an unnatural angle. Deep claw wounds stretched across its side. Behind it, two older wolves ran desperately trying to support its weakening body. The wounded animal collapsed only a few steps from the cabin. Its breathing became shallow. Its eyes slowly began to close. The messenger immediately stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we should take it to the royal temple." The woman gently shook her head. "If it moves again, it will die." The king looked from the dying wolf to the woman. His voice remained calm. "Can you save it?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she knelt beside the animal. Her hands carefully examined every wound. Her fingers pressed lightly against broken bone. She watched its breathing. She listened to its heartbeat. Only then did she speak. "If I begin now, there is still hope." There was no pride in her voice, no promise of miracles, only quiet certainty built upon experience. The king stepped back. The wolves immediately created space around her. No command was needed. No fear controlled them, only trust. Inside the cabin, she worked without hesitation. The king remained outside watching through the open doorway. He expected chants, sacred rituals, ancient magic. Instead, he saw discipline. She cleaned every wound with warm water gathered before sunrise. She crushed leaves between smooth stones until rich green medicine slowly formed. She carefully placed handmade splints against the shattered leg before wrapping them with strips of clean cloth. Every movement served a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was rushed. Hours passed like silent waves. The king never left. Neither did the wolves. The messenger finally whispered, "Your Majesty, this cannot replace divine healing." The king answered without taking his eyes from the cabin. "Then why does it keep working?" The messenger had no reply. Inside the cabin, the wounded wolf slowly lifted its head. Its breathing grew stronger. The trembling stopped. Its heartbeat steadied. The woman quietly offered fresh water. The wolf drank. Outside, one by one, the waiting wolves relaxed. The clearing itself seemed to breathe again. The Alpha King felt something changing inside him, not because he had witnessed magic, because he had witnessed mastery. Years of quiet work had created something greater than reputation. The royal healers possessed blessings. This woman possessed understanding. He suddenly remembered another lesson from long ago. His father had once told him that true strength rarely announced itself. It simply endured until the world had no choice but to notice. He had forgotten those words. Now they returned with painful clarity. The cabin door slowly opened once more. The wounded wolf stepped into the morning light. Its injured leg still carried fresh bandages. Yet it stood firmly. It walked without collapsing. Every wolf surrounded it with soft cries of relief. The Alpha King watched in complete silence. For the first time in many years, doubt entered his heart. Not doubt about the woman. Doubt about everyone who had convinced him she should never matter. Far away beyond the forest, another pair of unseen eyes watched from the shadows. A rider hidden beneath a dark cloak turned his horse toward the capital. His mission was not to protect the kingdom. His mission was to make certain the Alpha King never learned the truth. And now he had failed. The Alpha King remained outside the cabin long after the healed wolf disappeared into the trees with the rest of the pack. He had seen enough battles to know the difference between luck and skill. Luck appeared once, then vanished. Skill repeated itself until no one could deny it. Everything he had witnessed inside that small wooden cabin carried the weight of years spent mastering a craft that the kingdom had refused to respect. The silence around him felt heavier than any battlefield, because it forced him to question the people he had trusted for so many years. The woman quietly cleaned her hands inside a wooden basin before placing every herb back upon its shelf. Nothing inside the cabin looked expensive. Every tool had been repaired many times. Every bottle had been carefully labeled by hand. Every corner reflected patience instead of wealth. She never looked toward the king waiting outside. She simply continued her work as though another wounded wolf could arrive at any moment. Her calm carried no fear of the throne and no desire to impress it. That unsettled him more than open defiance ever could. He slowly stepped inside the cabin. Warm light from the fireplace filled the room with a quiet comfort that the palace had somehow forgotten. The scent of fresh pine mixed with healing herbs drifted through the air. The king looked across the shelves where hundreds of dried plants rested beside carefully carved wooden boxes. Every item had its place. Every place had purpose. His eyes stopped on one worn notebook resting near the window. Its leather cover had faded with age. The edges had been repaired with rough thread. He could see page after page filled with careful writing and detailed drawings of plants, bones, wounds, and remedies collected through years of observation. The king understood immediately. This woman had built her knowledge one lesson at a time while everyone else depended upon blessings they never questioned. She finally turned toward him. Her voice remained soft. "This place is small for a king." The king answered with quiet honesty. "Today I did not come as a king." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded without another word. Outside, the messenger waited beside the horses while the wolves slowly disappeared into the deeper forest. He noticed fresh tracks approaching from the eastern hills. 3 more wolves appeared carrying another wounded companion whose breathing had already become weak. The messenger stared in disbelief. It never stopped. Every sunrise brought another life to this forgotten place. The Alpha King walked outside just as the new wolves reached the clearing. This time he noticed something different. Each wolf paused briefly before entering the yard, almost as though they understood they were stepping onto sacred ground, not because of magic, because of trust. The woman immediately knelt beside the injured animal. Its shoulder had been torn open by massive claws. The wound looked older than the others. Infection had already begun spreading beneath the skin. The king remembered seeing similar injuries during border wars. Most soldiers never survived them. The woman gathered fresh herbs without wasting a single movement. She worked with complete focus while the wolves watched in absolute silence. No panic filled the clearing, no confusion, only complete faith. The king slowly realized that these creatures had chosen her long before the kingdom ever noticed. They had seen something no council ever bothered to see. Hours later, another horse approached the cabin. Its rider wore the white robes of the Royal Healing Temple. The messenger immediately recognized him, one of the chief healers. The priest climbed down with visible disgust written across his face. His eyes swept across the wolves before stopping upon the woman. "You continue breaking sacred law." His voice carried enough pride to poison the peaceful clearing. The Alpha King remained hidden beside the trees without revealing himself. He wanted to hear the truth before his presence changed it. The healer continued speaking. "You deceive these creatures with dangerous practices. You insult the moon goddess every time you touch the wounded." The woman never raised her voice. She simply continued treating the wolf lying before her. The healer stepped closer. "Did you hear me?" She finally looked at him. "I heard every word. Then why do you ignore them? Because the wolf is still bleeding." The healer's face hardened. "Your place was decided years ago. You failed every sacred examination. You were judged unworthy. Nothing you do here changes that." For a brief moment, sadness crossed her face. Not anger, not hatred, only quiet disappointment. Then she answered, "Titles never stopped the bleeding. Knowledge did." The words struck the Alpha King harder than any sword. He remembered countless wounded soldiers who had died despite every sacred ritual performed over them. How many lives had been lost because everyone believed only blessed hands deserved to heal? The healer looked around the clearing. His anger grew stronger when he saw the wolves refusing to leave. He pointed toward them. "These beasts know nothing. They cannot choose truth." The moment those words left his mouth, every wolf slowly stood. Not with violence, not with rage, with warning. Their eyes never left the healer. Even the injured wolf lifted its head. The priest instinctively stepped backward. For the first time, fear replaced pride. The Alpha King finally stepped forward. "Enough!" The healer froze. Color disappeared from his face as he recognized the king. He immediately lowered his head. "Your Majesty." The king walked slowly until he stood beside the woman. His voice remained calm, though disappointment echoed beneath every word. "I have watched everything. I have heard enough." The healer struggled to defend himself. "She has no blessing." The king looked toward the recovering wolf. "Yet it still lives." The healer found no answer. The king turned back toward him. "Return to the capital. Tell the council I will speak with them myself." The priest quickly mounted his horse and disappeared through the trees without another word. Silence returned once again. The woman quietly resumed her work as though nothing important had happened. But the Alpha King understood everything had changed. Someone inside his own kingdom had buried the truth for years. Someone had protected power instead of lives. As evening, shadows stretched across the forest, the king looked toward the mountains where the palace stood beyond the horizon. He had arrived searching for one forgotten woman. He was leaving with something far more dangerous, proof that the kingdom itself had been living behind a carefully crafted lie. And somewhere inside the palace, the people responsible had just learned that the Alpha King was finally asking questions they could no longer silence. The ride back to the capital felt longer than the journey into the forest. The Alpha King said nothing as his horse climbed the winding mountain road. The cold wind struck his face but failed to quiet the storm inside his mind. Every heartbeat carried the same question. How had one forgotten woman accomplished what the greatest healers in the kingdom could not? More importantly, who had worked so hard to keep her hidden from him? The answers no longer felt distant. They felt close enough to touch. The gates of the capital opened before sunset. The city welcomed its ruler with cheers that echoed through the streets. Merchants stopped their work. Soldiers saluted with raised swords. Children ran toward the royal road hoping to catch a glimpse of the Alpha King. He barely noticed any of it. His thoughts remained inside the forest beside the small wooden cabin where truth had quietly survived, while the palace celebrated its own illusions. Far above the city, the royal fortress waited beneath a sky painted deep red by the setting sun. The towers stood proud against the mountains. For years they had represented strength. Today they looked different. Today they looked like walls hiding dangerous secrets. Word of the king's return spread through the palace before he reached the main hall. The royal council gathered once again. This time no one smiled. The chief royal healer stood near the throne with forced confidence, but fear hid beneath his calm expression. The messenger who had returned ahead of the king had already delivered enough information to unsettle every powerful family inside the kingdom. The Alpha King entered the chamber without ceremony. His footsteps echoed across the polished stone floor. No one dared speak first. He stopped before the throne but refused to sit. A ruler standing before his council carried greater weight than one resting comfortably above them. His sharp eyes moved across every face. Some avoided his gaze. Others struggled to appear calm. He finally spoke. "How long?" The room remained silent. His voice grew colder. "How long have reports about the woman been hidden from me?" No answer came. The silence itself became another confession. The king slowly walked through the chamber. Every step increased the pressure upon those surrounding him. At last, an elderly council member lowered his head. "Several years." The words echoed through the hall. The Alpha King stopped walking. Several years. Hundreds of wounded wolves had reached the cabin. Hundreds of reports had disappeared before reaching his hands. His jaw tightened. Who ordered it? The council looked toward the chief royal healer. Only for a moment. But that single glance revealed everything. The healer immediately stepped forward. "Your Majesty, every decision was made to protect stability. Rumors destroy kingdoms. False hope creates rebellion." The king stared at him. "Did you investigate her?" The healer hesitated. There was no need. The king took another step. "Did you ever see her work?" Silence. "Did you ever test her knowledge?" Again, there was no answer. The king's disappointment filled the chamber like gathering thunder. You condemned someone without evidence. You ignored lives that could have been saved. You protected pride instead of truth. The healer quickly defended himself. She has no blessing. The moon goddess never chose her. The Alpha King's eyes hardened. Perhaps we have spent too many years worshipping blessings and too few years respecting wisdom. The chamber froze. Those words challenged beliefs older than the kingdom itself. Several nobles exchanged nervous glances. The chief healer realized the conversation had moved beyond his control. Before anyone could speak, another guard rushed into the chamber. He dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, a patrol has returned from the northern border. Several soldiers were attacked by mountain beasts. The royal healers cannot stop the bleeding." The room immediately turned toward the king. Every battle injury placed the reputation of the royal temple at stake. The chief healer lifted his head with confidence. "We will save them." The king looked directly into his eyes. "You said the same about every wolf." The confidence disappeared. Without another word, the Alpha King walked toward the palace infirmary. The council hurried behind him. Servants stepped aside as the royal doors opened. Inside, rows of wounded soldiers lay upon wooden beds. Some cried quietly through clenched teeth. Others stared silently toward the ceiling. The scent of medicine mixed with blood filled the air. Royal healers moved quickly between patients. Their robes remained spotless despite the suffering surrounding them. One young captain struggled to breathe. Deep wounds crossed his chest. Fresh bandages had already turned dark with blood. The chief healer knelt beside him and whispered sacred prayers. Soft silver light appeared around his hands. The watching nobles sighed with relief. The blessing had begun. Minutes passed. The bleeding continued. The captain grew weaker. The silver light slowly faded. The healer looked exhausted. His face revealed something he desperately tried to hide. Failure. The Alpha King watched without speaking. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the throne. The king finally gave an order that shocked everyone. "Prepare a carriage. We are bringing the wounded to the forest." The entire infirmary froze. Several priests immediately objected. "Your Majesty, the journey is too dangerous." The king answered calmly. "Remaining here is more dangerous." The chief healer stepped forward. "If people discover that royal soldiers are being taken to her, they will lose faith in us." The Alpha King looked directly at him. "Faith built upon lies deserves to be lost." The word struck harder than any punishment. Within moments, servants prepared wagons. Carefully, the wounded soldiers were placed inside. Some remained unconscious. Others whispered desperate prayers. Outside the palace, thousands of citizens gathered along the streets watching the unusual procession. Confusion spread through the crowd. Why were royal soldiers leaving the capital instead of entering the healing temple? Rumors traveled faster than horses. Some spoke of miracles hidden in the forest. Others whispered that the Alpha King had finally discovered a terrible secret. Far above the city, inside a quiet tower, another figure watched every wagon disappear beyond the gates. His face remained hidden beneath a dark hood. A slow smile crossed his lips. The king had finally chosen the right path, exactly as planned, because the truth waiting inside the forest would not only destroy the royal healers, it would force the Alpha King to uncover a betrayal far older than he could possibly imagine. Night settled across the forest long before the royal wagons reached the lonely cabin. The moon hung high above the ancient trees, and silver light covered every narrow path. The sound of wooden wheels echoed through the darkness while exhausted horses pushed forward one final mile. Soldiers carrying burning lanterns surrounded the wounded. Their faces showed fear mixed with hope, because none of them knew whether they were riding toward salvation or disappointment. The woman heard them before they reached the clearing. She stepped outside with a small lantern resting quietly in her hand. Its warm light touched the doorway while shadows danced across the old wooden walls. Behind her, the wolves slowly emerged from the forest. Their glowing eyes reflected the moonlight, but none of them looked toward the soldiers. Every wolf looked only at the wagons carrying the wounded. The Alpha King climbed down before anyone else. His eyes met hers once again. This time, neither of them needed introductions. He simply stepped aside and revealed the injured soldiers waiting behind him. Several of them will not survive until sunrise. She walked toward the first wagon without asking another question. One glance was enough. She moved from one soldier to another, studying every wound with calm precision. Some had broken ribs. Others had deep claw marks across their backs. One young warrior had already lost so much blood that his skin had become pale beneath the lantern light. The woman closed her eyes for one brief moment. Not to pray, to think. When she opened them again, every movement became quick and purposeful. She pointed toward the cabin. "Bring him inside first." The soldiers obeyed immediately. No one questioned her, not even the royal guards. The Alpha King watched carefully as his own warriors followed the orders of a woman the kingdom had once declared worthless. Something invisible had already changed. Authority no longer belonged only to titles. It followed competence. The small cabin suddenly became alive with movement. Fresh water boiled above the fire. Bundles of herbs covered the wooden table. Clean cloth rested beside handmade medicines prepared long before anyone arrived. She had lived every day expecting another life to depend upon her. Nothing inside the cabin reflected panic. Everything reflected preparation. Outside, the wolves remained perfectly still around the clearing. They formed a silent circle facing the darkness beyond the trees. The captain of the royal guard noticed it first. "They are protecting us." The Alpha King slowly nodded. He had reached the same conclusion. The wolves were not guarding the woman. They were guarding everyone she was trying to save. Hours passed. The forest remained silent except for the crackling fire and quiet footsteps inside the cabin. One by one, the wounded soldiers received treatment. The woman barely rested. Her hands never slowed. Every decision came with quiet confidence earned through countless unseen years. She taught young helpers gathered from nearby villages how to grind herbs and clean wounds correctly. None of them carried sacred blessings. None wore royal robes. Yet each followed her instructions with complete trust. The Alpha King realized something else. She had never kept her knowledge for herself. She had been building healers while the palace had been protecting status. Near midnight, the first miracle appeared. The youngest soldier opened his eyes. His breathing had become steady. The fever burning through his body had disappeared. His mother, who had traveled with the wagons, covered her face with trembling hands as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She fell to her knees before the woman. The healer gently lifted her back onto her feet. "No one kneels here. Help your son stand when morning comes." The Alpha King heard every word. There was no hunger for praise, no desire for glory, only compassion. Another hour passed, then another. The second soldier regained consciousness, then the third. Hope slowly replaced despair throughout the clearing. Even the guards who had doubted the journey now watched with growing respect. Far away inside the capital, panic spread through the royal healing temple. Servants rushed through long stone corridors carrying alarming reports. More citizens had begun refusing treatment inside the temple. Families whispered about the woman in the forest. Hunters carried injured children toward her cabin. Farmers traveled through the night hoping she would help their loved ones. Every wagon leaving the city carried another story. Every story weakened the temple. The chief royal healer slammed both hands against a heavy wooden table. His face burned with anger. "This cannot continue." One elderly priest spoke carefully. "People trust results." The chief healer turned sharply. "Then we destroy the reason for those results." The room became silent. Several priests stared at him with disbelief. He lowered his voice. "If the cabin disappears, then so do the stories." No one answered. Yet no one refused. Back in the forest, dawn slowly approached once again. Soft golden light slipped between the trees. Birds began singing above the clearing. The first soldier stepped outside the cabin, supported only by a wooden staff. The men who had carried him from the palace stared in complete disbelief. Only hours earlier, they had expected to bury him. Now, he stood beneath the morning sky, breathing deeply with strength, slowly returning to his body. More soldiers followed. Some walked carefully, others leaned upon friends. Every one of them remained alive. The Alpha King looked across the clearing where his warriors stood together beneath the rising sun. For the first time in many years, he felt something greater than victory. He felt certainty. The kingdom had not lost its greatest healer. It had abandoned her. He turned toward the woman ready to speak. Before a single word left his mouth, one of the wolves suddenly lifted its head. A deep warning growl rolled through the forest. Then every wolf did the same. The peaceful morning vanished. Birds exploded into the sky. The horses became restless. The guards reached for their weapons. From deep within the trees, the sound of many approaching footsteps echoed closer with every passing second. Someone was coming, and judging by the fear in the wolves' eyes, they had not come seeking healing. The warning spread through the forest before a single enemy appeared. Every wolf stood perfectly still, with its ears raised toward the eastern ridge. Their growls grew deeper, until the peaceful clearing felt wrapped in invisible danger. The horses pulled nervously against their reins while the royal guards formed a protective line around the cabin. No one gave the order. Instinct had already taken control. The Alpha King rested one hand upon the hilt of his sword. His eyes searched the trees. He had learned long ago that forests spoke before battles began. Birds disappeared first. Then silence followed. That silence had returned. The woman looked toward the wolves instead of the soldiers. She trusted their senses more than any scout. Moments later, dark figures stepped between the trees. 10 riders emerged from the shadows wearing the white robes of the Royal Healing Temple. Behind them marched armed guards carrying torches despite the morning light. The chief royal healer rode at their front. His proud face showed no respect for the peaceful place before him, only anger. Only fear. His horse stopped several steps from the cabin. He looked directly at the woman. "Your deception ends today." The Alpha King slowly stepped forward. The clearing fell silent. The chief healer immediately bowed. "Your Majesty." The king answered with a cold stare. "Why have you come armed to the home of a healer?" The chief healer lifted his head, to protect the kingdom from false hope. His voice carried confidence, yet his eyes betrayed something deeper. Desperation. He could already feel power slipping through his hands. The Alpha King looked toward the soldiers who had survived the night. Every one of them stood alive behind the cabin. Bandages still covered their wounds, yet strength had returned to their faces. The king spoke calmly. "Do these men look deceived?" The chief healer refused to look at them. "One success proves nothing," the king replied without raising his voice. "Then explain the wolves. Explain the villagers. Explain the soldiers. Explain every report hidden from my throne." The healer remained silent. For the first time, the guards standing beside him began exchanging uncertain glances. They had followed orders. Now those orders suddenly felt dangerous. The chief healer pointed toward the cabin. "She practices forbidden methods. She insults sacred law. She must be taken into custody before the people lose faith forever." The woman finally stood. She brushed dried herbs from her hands. Her voice remained gentle. "If faith depends on ignoring the suffering before your eyes, then perhaps it deserves to be questioned." Those words spread through the clearing like quiet thunder. Even the soldiers behind the king lowered their heads in thought. The Alpha King watched her carefully. She never argued to protect herself. She argued only for those still suffering. That difference changed everything. The chief healer realized words were no longer enough. He raised one hand. Several armed guards stepped toward the cabin. The wolves moved first. Dozens of powerful bodies silently crossed between the guards and the healer. No teeth showed. No attack came. Only an unbreakable wall of living loyalty. The guards froze. None dared take another step. The chief healer shouted another order. "Move them." Not a single guard obeyed. Fear had replaced obedience. Every soldier understood the meaning of wolves defending someone without command. Animals never lied for power. The Alpha King slowly walked until he stood between both sides. His presence alone forced complete silence. He looked toward the royal guards. "Lower your weapons." Every sword disappeared back into its sheath. The chief healer stared in disbelief. "Your Majesty, you cannot protect her," the king answered firmly. "I protect justice. If justice stands beside her, then I stand beside her." Shock spread across every face. Those words echoed through the trees. The chief healer felt years of influence collapsing beneath him. His voice grew desperate. "She threatens everything we built." The Alpha King looked directly into his eyes. "No. She threatens everything you built." The difference hung heavily in the air. The healer stepped backward. His breathing became uneven. For years, he had believed the throne belonged to him as much as the king. Now he realized that illusion had ended. One elderly guard slowly stepped away from the healer. Then another. Soon, nearly every soldier stood closer to the Alpha King than to the temple. Without realizing it, they had already chosen, not between two people. Between truth and pride. Far above the clearing, hidden among the rocky cliffs, the hooded stranger watched every moment. His face remained invisible beneath the dark cloth. He smiled quietly. The first wall had fallen exactly as expected, yet the greatest secret remained buried. His eyes drifted toward the woman below. She still knew nothing about the past. The Alpha King still remembered only fragments. Neither understood how deeply their lives had been connected years before the throne separated them. Back in the clearing, the woman suddenly noticed something everyone else had missed. One young guard standing beside the chief healer was trembling. His hands pressed tightly against his stomach. Blood slowly stained the front of his white uniform. He had been hiding an injury the entire time. She walked toward him without hesitation. The chief healer immediately stepped between them. "Do not touch him." The young guard collapsed before another word could be spoken. His body struck the ground with a heavy sound. Fresh blood spread beneath him. Panic swept through the temple guards. Several rushed forward. The chief healer knelt beside the wounded man and placed glowing hands above the injury. Silver light appeared once again. Everyone watched. Seconds passed. The bleeding continued. The light slowly faded. The young guard's breathing weakened. Fear spread across every face. The Alpha King looked toward the woman. She remained perfectly still. She had not moved. She would never force herself where she was not wanted. Instead, she simply waited. The choice no longer belonged to her. It belonged to those who had spent years denying her worth. The chief healer stared helplessly at the dying guard. His blessing had failed once again. The silence around him became unbearable. Then, for the first time in his life, he slowly turned his head toward the woman. His pride battled against reality. His lips trembled. Every person in the clearing waited for the words he never believed he would have to speak, and finally they came. "Save him." The clearing became so quiet that even the wind seemed to stop moving through the trees. Every pair of eyes turned toward the woman. Only moments earlier, the chief royal healer had demanded her arrest. Now, the life of one of his own men rested entirely in her hands. Pride had finally reached the place where it could no longer hide behind titles. The woman walked forward without the slightest trace of victory upon her face. She never looked at the chief healer. She never reminded him of the insults he had thrown at her. She never asked for gratitude. She knelt beside the wounded guard exactly as she had knelt beside every wolf and every soldier before him. To her, there was no difference. Pain deserved help before judgment. She carefully pressed one hand against the wound, while her other hand reached for a clean cloth. Fresh blood continued soaking through the fabric. The young guard struggled to breathe. His frightened eyes searched the faces surrounding him until they finally settled upon the woman. For the first time since arriving, he looked calm. She examined the injury with complete focus. The blade had entered at an angle. It had missed the heart, but damaged a major blood vessel. Every second mattered. She looked toward two nearby soldiers. "Boil fresh water. Bring the mountain root from the third shelf inside the cabin. Move quickly. Neither soldier hesitated. They obeyed before realizing she held no official authority over them. The Alpha King quietly noticed that simple truth. Real leadership had nothing to do with rank. People naturally followed those who inspired confidence. Inside the cabin, the fire burned brighter as fresh water heated above the flames. The woman crushed dark roots between two smooth stones until they formed a thick medicine with a sharp, earthy scent. She cleaned the wound with slow, careful movements before placing the herbal mixture deep against the injury. Every action came with quiet precision. Every choice reflected years of knowledge earned through observation rather than inherited status. Outside, the chief royal healer remained frozen. His hands still carried traces of fading silver light. For the first time, those blessings felt painfully empty. His greatest weapon had become powerless before a woman he had spent years calling worthless. One of the younger priests slowly stepped beside him. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Perhaps we judged her too quickly. The chief healer closed his eyes. Those words pierced deeper than any sword. The woman continued working. She stitched the wound with steady hands. She secured fresh bandages before gently helping the guard into a resting position beside the fire. Minutes passed. The clearing waited in complete silence. The wounded man's breathing slowly became stronger. The shaking stopped. Color gradually returned to his face. At last he opened his eyes. A weak smile appeared across his lips. The soldiers surrounding him released the breath they had been holding. Several lowered their heads in quiet relief. Others simply stared in disbelief. The Alpha King stepped closer. He placed one hand upon the young guard's shoulder. "You will live." The guard nodded weakly. Then he looked toward the woman. "Thank you," she answered with a gentle smile. "Save your strength. That is thanks enough." The chief royal healer slowly approached. Every step seemed heavier than the last. Years of pride fought against the truth standing before him. When he finally reached the woman, he could not lift his eyes. His voice sounded quieter than anyone had ever heard. "I was wrong." The clearing fell silent once again. No one expected those words. Not the soldiers, not the priests, not even the Alpha King. The woman looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke softly. "Being wrong is not the greatest failure. Refusing to learn is." Those simple words carried more power than any punishment the king could have given. Several priests lowered their heads with shame. The Alpha King looked across the faces gathered before the cabin. He saw something changing, not through fear, through truth. The old order had begun breaking apart before his eyes. Just then, the royal messenger came riding hard into the clearing. His horse was covered in sweat. He climbed down before it had fully stopped. "Your Majesty, the capital is in chaos. Crowds have gathered outside the Royal Healing Temple. People are demanding answers. Families whose loved ones died under royal care have begun speaking openly. The stories are spreading faster than we can control them." The Alpha King's expression remained calm. "What about the council?" The messenger swallowed heavily. "Several nobles have already left the palace. Others are destroying records inside the archives." The king's eyes narrowed. Destroying records meant only one thing. Someone feared the truth hidden inside them. He immediately turned toward his guards. "Ride back to the capital. Seal the royal archives. No document leaves that palace. No one enters without my order." The guards mounted their horses and disappeared down the forest road. The chief royal healer looked visibly shaken. Destroying records made no sense unless powerful people had been hiding something far greater than failed treatments. The Alpha King slowly turned toward the woman. His voice carried quiet determination. "There is something about your past they never wanted me to see." She looked at him with genuine confusion. "My past? I have lived here for years. I know nothing beyond this forest." The king studied her face carefully. He believed her, which meant someone had hidden the truth from both of them. High above the clearing, the hooded stranger watched the royal riders disappear toward the capital. His smile slowly faded. The king had moved faster than expected. Soon the sealed archives would reveal names, dates, orders. One forgotten document would connect the healer to the royal family in a way no one could imagine. The game had entered its final stage, and before another sunrise, the Alpha King would discover that the woman everyone believed to be the weakest soul in the kingdom had once been the very person destiny had chosen to stand beside the throne. The capital had never felt so restless. For generations, the Royal Healing Temple had stood as a symbol of unquestioned power. Its white towers reached toward the heavens. Its sacred halls had witnessed countless ceremonies. Nobles bowed before its healers. Common people waited for hours hoping for a blessing. Now those same streets were filled with uncertainty. Crowds gathered outside the temple gates. Whispers moved faster than the wind. People who had stayed silent for years were finally speaking. They spoke about loved ones who had entered the temple and never returned. They spoke about soldiers abandoned after royal healers declared their wounds impossible. They spoke about the woman in the forest who had saved lives without asking for anything in return. The truth was no longer hidden. It was walking through the streets. Inside the palace, the Alpha King stood before the royal archives. The ancient doors had remained sealed for decades. Only the highest members of the kingdom were allowed inside. Now the king himself unlocked them. The heavy doors opened slowly, revealing endless shelves filled with forgotten records. Dust covered ancient documents. Old decisions rested beneath years of silence. The king entered alone. Every step deeper into the archives felt like walking through the buried memories of his own reign. The royal messenger followed behind, carrying a lantern. They searched through countless records until they found a hidden section marked with a symbol that had been scratched away. Someone had tried to erase it. The Alpha King noticed immediately. Someone did not want this discovered. The messenger carefully opened the damaged box. Inside were documents wrapped in black cloth. The first page carried a date from many years earlier. The king read the words slowly. Then he stopped. His expression changed. Because the name written inside belonged to the woman from the forest. The same woman who had been called worthless. The same woman who had been rejected by every healer. The same woman who had saved the warriors of the kingdom. But the records revealed something impossible. She had once been connected to the royal family, not through blood, through a forgotten promise. Years earlier, she had been chosen to study beside the greatest healers in the kingdom. She had shown abilities beyond anyone of her generation. Her understanding of medicine had surpassed even the most respected masters. But someone feared her knowledge. Someone feared a healer who did not depend upon royal approval. The record showed how her reputation had been destroyed, how false accusations had been created, how the sacred trials had been manipulated, how the kingdom had abandoned the one person who could have changed everything. The Alpha King slowly closed his eyes. The pain was not from what he discovered. It was from remembering. He remembered the day she disappeared. He remembered hearing rumors. He remembered choosing silence because powerful people convinced him it was necessary for the kingdom. He had believed he was protecting peace. Instead, he had protected the people who stole her future. The messenger lowered his head. "Your Majesty." The king remained silent for a long moment. Then he placed the documents back into the box. His voice was quiet. But something inside it had changed. I was not betrayed by my enemies. I was betrayed by those standing closest to me. Outside the archives, the palace bells suddenly rang. Not the celebration bells. The warning bells. Guards rushed through the halls. The messenger immediately moved toward the door. What happened? A guard stopped before them. The remaining council members have gathered in the throne room. They refuse to surrender their positions. The Alpha King walked toward the throne room without hesitation. For years, he had allowed powerful people to hide behind tradition. That ended today. When the doors opened, the remaining nobles stood waiting. Some looked angry, some looked afraid. The chief royal healer stood among them, no longer confident, no longer untouchable. The Alpha King entered carrying the records in his hand. No one spoke. They already knew. The truth had reached the throne. The king placed the documents before them. Years of lies, years of manipulation, years of stolen lives, all recorded by your own hands. One noble stepped forward. We acted for the kingdom. The king looked at him. No, you acted for yourselves. A ruler who protects corruption does not protect a kingdom. He destroys it slowly. The words cut deeper than any punishment. The nobles looked toward each other, searching for support. But there was none. The people had already chosen. The soldiers had already chosen. Even the wolves had already chosen. The old order had lost its foundation. The Alpha King removed the symbols of authority from those responsible. Not with anger. Not with revenge, with final judgment. The chief royal healer stood silently as his title disappeared. For the first time, he understood what true power looked like. It was not a blessing. It was not a position. It was the ability to earn loyalty from those who had nothing to gain. Days later, the gates of the Royal Healing Temple opened again. But this time, the people did not enter seeking miracles. They entered seeking knowledge. The Alpha King ordered that healing would no longer belong only to those chosen by tradition. Anyone with skill and dedication would be taught. Anyone capable of saving lives would be respected. The woman from the forest was invited to the palace, not as a servant, not as a royal healer beneath others, as the person who had exposed the weakness hidden inside the strongest walls of the kingdom. She stood before the throne where countless powerful people had once looked down upon her. Now the entire kingdom watched. The wolves stood behind her. The soldiers stood beside her. And the Alpha King stood before her with the understanding that the greatest strength he had ever found was the one everyone else had ignored. But as the kingdom celebrated a new beginning, another message arrived from the northern border. A hidden enemy had learned that the old hierarchy had fallen, and they believed a weakened kingdom was finally ready to be conquered. The Alpha King looked toward the mountains. The woman looked toward the wolves. The first battle had revealed the truth. The next battle would decide whether that truth could survive. The northern mountains had always been known as the kingdom's strongest shield. For generations, no enemy had crossed those frozen peaks. No army had dared challenge the warriors guarding that land. But now, the old enemies watched from beyond the snow-covered valleys. They had waited for weakness. They had waited for division. They believed the kingdom had lost its strength after the fall of the old order. They believed removing corrupt leaders had created chaos. They believed the Alpha King had become softer. They were wrong, because they did not understand what had truly changed. The kingdom was no longer held together by fear. It was held together by loyalty. When the enemy army appeared beyond the northern borders, the message reached the capital within hours. The council expected panic. They expected citizens to hide. They expected soldiers to question their leader. Instead, something unexpected happened. The warriors gathered without hesitation. Farmers brought supplies. Villagers opened their homes for injured soldiers. The people who had once been ignored by the old system now stood beside the throne because they finally believed in the person leading them. The Alpha King watched the army prepare beneath the palace walls. Years earlier, he would have measured strength only through weapons, through numbers, through power. Now he understood something deeper. An army without loyalty was only a group of people waiting to fall. An army with purpose could move mountains. Before sunrise, the Alpha King rode toward the northern battlefield. The woman from the forest traveled beside him. Not behind him, not beneath him, beside him. The wolves moved through the mountains around them like shadows. Their presence alone gave the soldiers confidence. They remembered the first time those wolves carried their wounded to a forgotten cabin. They remembered the woman everyone called powerless. Now they watched the same woman stand among warriors who once ignored her. The battlefield waited beneath dark clouds. The enemy army covered the valley. Their banners represented the old belief that power belonged only to those born above others. The Alpha King looked across the field. For a moment, the world became silent. Then the battle began. Steel collided, horses charged, the mountains echoed with the sound of war. But this battle was different from every battle before. The kingdom fought as one. Soldiers protected villagers. Villagers protected the wounded. Healers, trained under the woman's methods, moved through the battlefield saving lives without waiting for permission. The enemy expected chaos. They found unity. Hour after hour passed. The enemy forces slowly began losing ground. Their commander could not understand. He had studied the kingdom. He knew its weaknesses. He knew the corruption. He knew the divisions. But he did not know the greatest transformation had already happened. The kingdom was no longer fighting for a throne. It was fighting for everything they had finally earned. As the sun began setting behind the mountains, the enemy commander reached the Alpha King. He expected a ruler surrounded by fear. Instead, he found a leader surrounded by people willing to sacrifice everything beside him. The final clash shook the valley. When the dust settled, the enemy banner fell. The kingdom had survived. But the greatest victory was not the battlefield. It was what happened afterward. When the soldiers returned home, they did not celebrate a king who had conquered enemies. They celebrated a king who had changed himself. The Alpha King returned to the forest one final time. The cabin still stood beneath the ancient trees. The same small cabin that powerful people once ignored. The same place where wounded wolves had arrived every dawn. The same place where the truth had begun. He stood outside, quietly watching the wolves rest near the doorway. Years ago, he would have walked past this place without understanding its importance. Now he knew. Great power never needed a grand entrance. Sometimes it waited quietly. Sometimes it survived rejection. Sometimes it belonged to the person everyone else had forgotten. The woman stepped outside. The morning sunlight touched the forest. For a moment, neither of them moved. There were no titles between them, no throne, no expectations, only the truth they had finally uncovered. The Alpha King looked toward the cabin. The kingdom had changed because one person refused to stop helping others, even when the world refused to value her. And he had changed because he finally understood what true leadership meant. Not controlling people, not demanding loyalty, earning it. From that day forward, the kingdom entered a new era. The Royal Healing Temple became a place of learning instead of privilege. The strongest warriors trained beside ordinary people. Knowledge replaced arrogance. Respect replaced fear. And every dawn, the wolves still walked through the forest. They still carried the wounded. They still followed the same path toward the small cabin. But now they no longer came because the kingdom had forgotten her. They came because the entire kingdom finally knew her worth. Years later, stories would still be told about the woman without a healing blessing. The woman who had no royal title, no sacred mark, no army of her own, yet she changed the destiny of an entire kingdom. And the Alpha King, who once ruled through strength, learned the greatest lesson of all. The strongest person in the kingdom was never the one sitting on the throne. It was the one who could make the world stand beside them, and that was the moment the true Alpha King was born.